Good afternoon. I am pleased to be sharing the stage today with Michael Steen, the CEO of Atlas Air. Michael was named CEO of Atlas in June of this year, but he is no stranger to Atlas, having served the last 16 years as Chief Commercial Officer. Michael and I are both relatively new to our positions, so today is the first opportunity for us to meet in person. So I am just as interested in hearing what Michael has to say about the future of Atlas and the air cargo industry, as I know our audience is. So welcome, Michael.
Great, thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, congratulations to you as well.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. Yeah, I think you're going to have fun on the cargo side, because cargo is so important, as we're going to talk about here. And we saw it during the pandemic, and I've said it for years, air cargo is at the center of the global economy and the global supply chain.
That's right. And speaking of that, you know, Michael, we in the aviation industry have long known the critical role that air cargo plays in driving the global economy, facilitating rapid and efficient trade. And clearly during the pandemic, the rest of the world learned about the unique and irreplaceable role of this industry. What are your biggest lessons learned from COVID, and how is Atlas applying those moving forward?
A great question. I think that we as a society, we learned a lot of things during COVID as well about, let's say, what works and doesn't work, because it was so disruptive. First of all, I'm extremely proud of our 2,800 pilots and our 2,000 ground staff that went out of their way during COVID just to recognize the role that we play, not only in the global supply chain and the economy, but actually in saving lives, right? And it was not an easy time to work, as everybody knows, because rules and regulations, they changed overnight sometimes, and sometimes in flight. So we had to be very adaptable and adjust our operation, be ready for whatever new surprise that could face us. And our team and every airline's teams and our partners in the world did a fantastic job to keep, let's say, the supply chains moving and obviously bring also the pharmaceuticals and other components to where people are at. I think the big takeaways is that COVID was so disruptive, and our industry is not adjusted to that, or is not structured to support it. We can see that we didn't have harmonized regulations around the world, which made customs procedures very difficult, for example. So that's certainly a debate that is continuing now, and work that's continuing to be done on that. I also think that we learned how to be very nimble and flexible in how to operate, because we are really in a globalized environment, and that is not going to change. And in order to do that, you have to build strong partnerships, you have to figure out solutions on the fly, basically, as far as how you position yourself. So I think that there are a lot of takeaways, only from an operational perspective. But for this event here, as we're talking to lawmakers too, I think it's important to recognize that trade is truly global, right? There is no going back or going away from that. And we need to make sure that we support that in all the aspects in order to make sure that supply chains are running more smoothly, can withstand some disruption like we saw during COVID as well. And I think those are some of the most important takeaways.
And on that point, harmonization, that's a word that we used a lot during the pandemic. It's a word that I think is still on the top of everyone's minds today. How important is that for Atlas?
Well, it's extremely important. We operate into 70 countries in the world, and we are the second largest freighter operator in the world, measured by FTK. So we are everywhere. We operate for customers and with a high on-time performance and precision, of course, and we need to make sure that we build our operating processes in a way that works in the various environments where we're at. Unfortunately, we see here on a global basis that on the cargo side, we are not as well aligned or harmonized as we perhaps are on the passenger side. And we could see it during COVID as well, that if we think about testing requirements, et cetera, that was different depending on the jurisdiction where you traveled. And those are things that we certainly need to address. And there are various forums and platforms around the world that are focusing on that now, around safety, as Scott was talking to here. That's something that's always will be paramount for our industry. And that is something that also needs to be harmonized when we think about things like transportation of lithium batteries, et cetera. Digitization. We are still a very antiquated system on the cargo side that needs to be harmonized, aligned, digitized, take paper out of the system, become more effective and efficient. And for that, we need government support as well, especially customs organizations that can help us drive that. And then the last one is around sustainability that we talked about this morning as well. So those are the really key three areas that we need to get alignment around the world.
So we've talked a lot about the surge in air cargo demand, the surge in operations. Now that most of the world has returned to the new normal, I may call it, where do you see the industry today?
So first of all, what happened during COVID was exceptional because all of us, we worked from home, we were shopping from home, we were entertaining from home. And that meant that the supply chains that had to adjust themselves as well to support that, right? So we set up our offices at home, and of course, there was a demand surge when it comes to both capital equipment, consumer equipment, goods, and let's say everything that goes along with it. That spiked up. Then, of course, as we saw various challenges around the world, the war in Ukraine happening, things normalizing, inflation increasing, then we saw air cargo demand beginning middle of last year decline. And now we're at the point here where most people in the industry thinks that it has reached the bottom, and we now see indicators that there is going to be an increase in demand again. So procurement managers' indexes are pointing upwards, and we are seeing orders coming back in, inventories are going down, and it's a typical cycles. So Lauren, if you look back 20 years and you look at the various cycles, they last for about 24 to 30 months, and then there's a downturn which lasts about 18 months. And if you look at the timing here, we're coming up on that mark now as well. So I think the expectations here from a demand perspective going forward is volume growth on a global basis between 2.5% to 4%. So that is something that we can rely on, that there will be growth coming back. But we also have seen a tremendous shift. So let's talk about e-commerce for a second. And e-commerce has been with us now for several years, and especially us here in the United States, we're used to that now as one of our main sources of retail purchases. But it only represents 18% of all retail sales. So it's still a very, very small portion. India, it's less than 4%. Brazil, it's 5%. And these are massive markets. And we have seen now, of course, the supply chains changing to cater more to the end consumer, which means that it's very hard to predict where you keep your inventories and how much, depending on what the procurements or purchase cycles they look like. And that is something that will continue. And we see now new companies popping up in fast fashion. They are not selling through their stores, they're selling directly to us as consumers. And the majority of that is air freight based, even for low-cost products. And that is a significant change from what we have seen in the past. So that's on the demand side. The other important piece is the supply side. And Scott was talking here about the supply chain challenges that we are facing, right? The OEMs are facing, and that's true. One thing that we haven't seen on the cargo side for the last 2 decades are a significant amount of retirements. And when we think about the lifetime of an aircraft, a freighter typically lives for about 30 to 35 years. Today in the world, there are 650 or so wide-body freighters, so MD-11s, 747s, and 777s, both production freighters and converted aircraft. 125 of those are older than 30 years. And what we can expect there in the next 5 years or so is a significant amount of retirements. Now then your question would, of course, be, well, how much new production aircraft are coming in and how many conversions can we do to mitigate that, in addition to the 2.5% to 4% growth? And my argument there is that I think that we will see a faster decline in supply than we will see an ability to replace that capacity as well. And lastly, when it comes to supply, traditionally over time, 50% of global air freight has flown in bellies of passenger aircraft and 50% on dedicated freighters. Now that changed during COVID, right? So coming out of COVID now, we're at the balance of 60% in freighters and 40% in passenger bellies. And when you look at the usage of passenger bellies, less than 50% of the actual capacity is actually used for freight because schedules have changed, destinations have changed, type of aircraft have changed. We're now flying very capable narrow-body aircraft across the transatlantic, for example. So I think we are looking at the scenario here where we will see demand coming back and supply is going to be challenged.
So just finally, one of the most important factors to enable increased trade and operational flexibility for a global network like yours have been open skies agreements. Given some of the recent efforts by foreign governments and others that could erode some of these foundational agreements, where do you think U.S. government efforts should be focused moving forward?
Well, I think first of all, the U.S. government has been very successful over time to build all these open skies relations and the bilateral agreements that we have, which has been extremely successful for the U.S. economy, for U.S. industries, and a company like ours. We were founded 31 years ago. That was the same year that the United States signed their first bilateral open skies agreement. And we've been benefiting from that as a company. We're now a $5 billion company. We have more than 100 aircraft. We fly to 70 destinations around the world. But more importantly, we serve global economies or national economies all over the world. That would not be possible to do and to support our partners, our customers, other airlines, express carriers, et cetera, if we didn't have those bilateral agreements, which impacts our traffic rights and our ability to serve the global industry. So I urge governments around the world to really uphold this and to increase competition by having more open skies agreements.
Thank you, Michael.
Pleasure. Thank you, Lauren.